podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered, the Day 3 Roland Garros edition. I'm delighted to say, got George Bellshaw with me this morning to look back at, the first round as a whole, Day 3, and to look ahead to an intriguing set of second round matches that kick off in just a couple of hours. I'm afraid to say we haven't got Calvin this morning. That is because Henry and Jules are in first round action in about an hour and 3/4 time, so he has a few more responsibilities this morning than chatting nonsense to us. But by the time you listen to this, that match probably will already have finished. But best of luck anyway to Henry and Jules in the second round, because we have confidence that the first round they will see off with ease. Anyway, let's crack on with me and George. George, obviously you've not had quite the same experience at the French Open as I have, but what would you say has been your sort of main takeaway from the first 3 days of Roland Garros?
That's a good question. I think there's probably a few kind of angles I'd look at for the tournament as a whole. So Djokovic, Alcaraz, both very good, solid starts. They're going to be the guys to beat, I think. Obviously in that half of the draw, nothing controversial in me saying that. Medvedev going in the other half, I think, has really strengthened Holger Rune's case. He's someone I thought had a really strong chance of reaching the final, but thought the match with Medvedev was a destined semi-final, really. And then Medvedev has obviously slipped up in quite spectacular fashion to save off Wild yesterday. On the women's side, I think Swiatek felt like she's in good nick yesterday, got a kind of second set bagel, but I would always exact a note of caution with that sometimes these injuries, they can get you through the first few rounds, and then once you're getting pushed a little bit harder, they can come out to bite you. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm 100% confident in her, but she couldn't have done more to make a statement. And similarly, Rybakina and Sabalenka feel strong as well. Sabalenka particularly, I thought that was a really tough first round match on paper against Kostyuk with a lot of kind of narrative around it. So to come through as she did was pretty encouraging. And then my final takeaway, James, is that my fantasy team is really going to be disastrous. I've already lost Lajovic, Krejcikova and Dzanček. So I'm feeling quite gloomy about it. So I'm hoping round 2 will treat me better and I can keep hold of my 7 remaining players. But Rune DMC feels like it's in big trouble early on.
Well, I would like to gloat over you, but Hot Struff also in a bit of bother. We've also lost 3 players, not least our captain, Jan-Lennard Struff, as well as Veronika Kudermetova and Elizabeth Mandlik, who managed to lose to a qualifier in the first round frustratingly. So yeah. I'm only 5 points ahead of you at this point, and it's gonna be close. My qualifier got through, which is my main excitement,
yeah.
But
losing the play your team is named afterwards early is always really disappointing, because they're there to remind you throughout the rest of the tournament how bad they were. So I always try and pick someone I think will be like a bit of an outsider in my team, but will do well. So Rune felt the obvious pick for me for this one. And I have to say, I think I couldn't go back through them all, but I've got a pretty good record of my team name captain taking them to the quarterfinals, at least. So that's a good omen for Holger Rune, who'll now probably lose second round now I've said that.
Well, you can obviously check on your progress in our pinned tweet. We've got a 4-way tie at the top at the moment between Yanni97, Da Vinci, the Eager Beavers, which is a good pun, and DD27, all with full compliments. We were talking on Twitter, myself and a couple of other people, hashtag FTU, about the best team names. I do like Eager Beavers. I've not seen that before. The Struff Dreams Are Made Of. There's quite a few good Jan-Lennard Struff puns, which I think is good.
James, I was once the Eager Beavers, so that's not true. And then the time I used it, there was someone else who's the Eager Beavers, and I think this Eager Beavers always plays under the same name. So I think they're a regular. So.
Yeah, and the other regular I really like is Nobody Beats Vitas Garolaitis 17 times in a row. That's one of my favourite. Panic at Verdasco, also very strong.
Nice.
Right, I mean, just to kind of pick up on a couple of things you said there. Interesting, the Holger Rune, have to pronounce the E, we now know this, stuff. He beat Christopher Eubanks yesterday in 4 sets. I mean, Eubanks played some lights out tennis because he really did look like a man who just, didn't care, but he had a real devil may care attitude. And yeah, he was swinging pretty freely. And I mean, that backhand at times was fabulous. But also, I think at one point someone said to me in the press box, Rune wants everyone to know that he's injured. And he had a bit of treatment on an ankle, and he did at times look... I mean, I think he looked like he got stronger as the match went on, but that I would definitely have a few fitness concerns. Just, I mean, he's not got the worst draw in the world, but he looked pretty cooked in the Rome final, and I mean that was 10 days ago now, so maybe that's not that relevant. But I would urge a note of caution on Rune's fitness, just having watched him yesterday. Sorry, George, you were going to say?
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, the other factor, and this isn't just Rune, and it's probably worth already looking at the bottom half in the round, really, because it's really open. Like, it's already, Medvedev not being there, Alcaraz and Djokovic ending in the same half of the draw. That's giving everyone in this half a real opportunity for many of them, reaching a first Grand Slam final. And I do think as soon as a draw becomes like that, and for someone like Holger Rune, who's not been that deep in a Grand Slam before, I think not beyond the quarters, you do suddenly have a bit of mental pressure to think, wow, this is my absolute opportunity here. I mean, if we talk about the names in this half of the draw, in Zverev's section, who you're looking at, Borna Coric, the highest seed, that's not a guy who's been really, really deep in a slam. In the next section, you've got to think like Yannick Sinner's really fancying his chances. Zverev's there as well, but Zverev, not quite there. Then you've got Casper Ruud, who of course has been to the final before. He looks the kind of favourite to come through that section and then meet Rune in the quarterfinals, or even Taylor Fritz has had a couple of decent results on the clay and more generally this year. So, but all those names, Zverev aside, really, are guys who are quite inexperienced deep in slams. And Ruud as well, I suppose. But
already in the bottom half, I think there's only 2 Grand Slam finalists left.
Yeah.
And that is Casper Ruud and Alexander Zverev, who obviously both lost Grand Slam finals and Casper Ruud's got 2 Grand Slam finals, but both have actually, even for Grand Slam finalists, have quite limited records deep in slam. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that is very open. I just wanted to talk about Holger Rune's second round matchup because he's got Gael Monfils. It was the first thing you asked me before we hit record on this call, George, is did I stay for Gael Monfils? I did stay for some of it. The night sessions, as anyone who knows here, do go pretty late because they don't start very early, but that's a bone of contention. And he went 5 sets with Sebastian Baez, who Sebastian Baez is just destined to play, be the B-side in thrilling 5-setters, it seems, because he's a really good player, and it was raucous last night, and there were 15,000 people in. A lot of them stayed to the end, and they weren't interested in Sebastian Baez winning many points. I mean, missing a first serve was enough to get them excited, and credit to him, he just served through the noise. We came home, my flatmate and I, and got back about midnight, and there was still 20 minutes left of the Monfils match, which we didn't realise, and he obviously was, I think, 4-love down in the final set, and he was fighting back, and we stuck it on, and I just couldn't believe what he was achieving, because he was literally limping behind the baseline between points. He's cramping to hell. I mean, the Rune Monfils will definitely be the night match on Thursday. and if he's recovered in any sort of way, like, it'll be absolutely staggering. Hopefully he'll be fit enough to give Rune a real go, but I am a bit worried that it might just be a bit of a walkover, sort of Murray Bautista Agut 2023 vibes, but fingers crossed.
Yeah, even if Monfils was fully fit at this stage in his career, I wouldn't be giving him too many chances against Rune,
Sure.
Unless that injury is bad. And then the next match for Rune, if assuming he goes through, is going to be a qualifier. I mean that's a great section if you've got a fantasy pick there in Olivieri or Vassavori having a double. Oh, do you have that?
Yeah, I have Olivieri.
Do you? Oh.
Yeah. Unbelievable scenes. I actually think he'll lose to Vavasori. Vavasori, by the way, beat Kekmanovic in 5 sets. Yeah. From 2 sets down, he won 3 consecutive tie breaks, 2 of which went to extra points, as in past
10-8 and 11-9.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And he hit 101 winners in the match. Like, he's obviously the guy who beat Murray in Madrid as well, which I think came completely out of the blue. Like, it was one of the reasons it was quite such a bad result for Murray, is that Vavasori had, no record of note. Like, that there was no sort of little indicator that he might be capable of this. Damien Kust, who's the challenger expert, may disagree with that, but, the guy's 28, and I think this is his first time in the second round of a Grand Slam. It's not exactly promising.
I mean, your guy came back as well, didn't he, in a 5-setter? So that 2 huge 5-set qualifier wins to set up a chance to get into the third round of a slam. Doesn't get much better than that for the kind of underdogs.
And also doesn't get much better than that for Holger Rune, who faces Gael Monfils, who basically doesn't have any legs left, and then a qualifier who's probably going to have played 10 sets in 3 days. He couldn't really pray for a much better draw, I think, but it'll get tougher when he faces, Taylor Fritz or Cherundolo, no doubt. Yeah. You mentioned Daniil Medvedev losing. He was beaten in 5 sets by Thiago Seyboth-Wild in an absolute ding-dong match, really. As always with Medvedev, it was wildly entertaining. There was a really good moment in the second set where he was discussing a mark with the umpire, I think, if I put it generously, and the crowd, obviously, it being Philippe Chatrier, were booing. And he turned around to them and put his finger to his lips and said, shush, 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 no, I'm talking to her. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her, and we can't have a conversation if you're booing. And she just had to awkwardly stand there and wait while he had this argument with the crowd. It was kind of fabulous, but the 5th set, I think there were 4 consecutive breaks of serve, and eventually Thiago Seyboth-Wild did triumph. I want to mention the elephant in the room straight away, which is that Thiago Seyboth-Wild has previously, and well, look, I'd love to be able to tell you the exact status of the domestic violence case against him, but he wasn't able to clarify that. He was asked about it in press, and the question was, you've been charged in June 2022 for domestic and psychological violence against your ex-wife. She's actually his ex-partner, they weren't married. Since then, nothing happened in terms of sentence. What do you expect to happen? I think he's awaiting sentence, as far as I can tell. But again, he said, I don't think it's a subject we should talk about it right here. I don't think it's a question you should be making to anybody. I don't think it comes to you to decide whether it's a place to be spoken of or not. He then said, you can write whatever you want, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to say. Although I don't think it's legally binding, although we did discuss it. George, we've obviously had some conversations about domestic violence on this podcast before, but I think it's quite disappointing that we're not able to say this is what is going on with this. And I understand the situation that he doesn't want to talk about it, but, equally, well, we're just waiting for the ATP to change their rules about this stuff, aren't we?
Yeah, it's just hugely frustrating and very difficult, and I think we've spoken in the past about the ATP being stronger on things like this, but I do also accept they're in a slightly difficult position where there's actual legal proceedings that are going on. That does to a degree feel fair enough for them to let them kind of play out. And yeah, it's a shame for him as well in some ways. I know, not a shame for him from the perspective of what he's done, but it's a shame for him that this is the biggest moment of his career by a long way. I mean, he's never been to the second round of a Grand Slam. He's taken out the world number 2. and it, feels very awkward to kind of celebrate this guy when you've got this kind of thing hanging over them. And that's fairly low down the pecking order in terms of if the allegations are true, then that's fairly insignificant, and he deserves what he gets, etc. But it does just make everything very difficult for everyone involved in the sport, not just trying to cover it, but trying to kind of engage with it when you see so many guys at the minute.
Also, you wouldn't get this kind of this what's going on is likely to, or what often happens in these cases here. I'll talk about it in general terms. Lawyers will do something called distancing, which is basically where you kick the can as far down the road as possible in the hope that if you do end up in front of a jury, they're a bit more removed from the case. And with high-profile cases, it's quite a common tactic, just to sort of try and reduce the amount the jury might be prejudiced. Obviously, you try not to have a prejudiced jury at all, but like I said, this is something that does happen. And as you say, it's a shame. It was a fabulous match, and ding dong, and like Chatrier loved it. And it is a shame not to kind of be able to stand up here and go, whoa, what a rising star, someone from Brazil. We're crying out for a Brazilian star. It's a huge market. We always talk about one time a Masters event in South America, and yet we sort of can't because, as you say, the ATP rules will change, right, in 2026, I think, because there's an agreement that was signed up to, and obviously when you have things like, it's effectively working conditions, then you have to abide by contracts, and you can only change them when they expire. But I think that will have some clauses in it about domestic violence. Probably in any other sort of job, like in football, it happens. You would be suspended on full pay. It's difficult in tennis because what is full pay? But a sensible agreement will say you're suspended, and we'll pay you, whatever your prize money was over the last 12 months for the next 12 months or something. But I don't know, like maternity pay, which obviously is nowhere near that, in fairness. Maternity pay is a disgrace. But it's not a great situation. Let's move on, shall we? Maybe to the women's draw. Because I don't... sorry.
Perhaps just in this section, there are a couple of losses as well to just quickly cast over. I mean, big shame for Draper, and obviously from a personal perspective, I'm very sad to see Dominic Thiem go out when it looked like he was starting to produce a rousing comeback, only to fall in the fifth. But
a mini excuse me, a mini sort of section of woe there. Draper, Thiem, and Borna Coric. I mean, Borna Coric is obviously back on the way up, but like there's so many injury woes in that particular little section. I mentioned Draper on yesterday's diary, but it doesn't get any less sad.
The other player is Auger-Aliassime, I suppose, who went out, isn't it?
I mean, it's funny, really. The women's draw, I think 16 seeds or 14 seeds have gone out already, and it's nowhere near that in the men's. I think there's only 8. But I mean, another day. I mean, it's interesting. Felix kind of not excused himself, but he said, "Look, I got ill the night before the match, and that did affect me." And he said it happened to him in Lyon as well. He got ill just the night before. So, he said, I wonder if there's something going on there and I need to find out. And he's going to have a whole load of tests and, see if he can work out what's going on. He had a bit of a shoulder complaint as well, which he says he's been managing for a while. So, clearly not fully fit, and sounds like he hasn't been fully fit for some time. So, with the grass coming up, where we think Felix could be really effective, not great news, but I mean great news for Fabio Fognini, who I think is the second oldest man in the draw. Do you know who the oldest man in the draw is, George? You'll kick yourself.
Not Novak, is it?
No, Novak's the third oldest, but Stan Wawrinka is the oldest man in the draw.
Yeah, Wawrinka.
I mean, I told you you'd kick yourself. But good. They all made it through to the second round, so good for the oldies.
Yeah, and
who needs
Fognini playing Kubler next? He fancies chances of a real swan song here in Paris. So.
And who would disagree that that's a good thing? Right, let's go to the women's draw because eventually we have to. As I say, there's a whole load of seeds out here. Of the bottom 8 seeds, only 2 remain. I'm going to run you through the names, George, and I want you to pick the one you're most surprised by. Shelby Rogers, Marie Buzkova, Sorana Castells, Shang Shui, Martina Trevisan, Annalena Kalinina, Magdalenetti, Victoria Azarenka, Karolina Pliskova, Barbara Krejcikova, Belinda Bencic, Veronika Kudermetova, Petra Kvitova, and Maria Sakkari. Pick your big shock.
I'm probably going to be very rude and say I'm not that surprised about anyone. I mean, I'd say probably the one I'm most surprised about, given who they were playing, is... I mean, it's hard. I'm not surprised like Zhang Shui lost, but kind of losing to Magdalena Frech, that's not someone I would be picking to bump their way through. I mean, Castells normally fairly solid at slams, and she lost to Paolini.
She said she was ill as well.
Yeah.
Everyone's. I don't know if there's something going around, but
I mean, look, but Azarenka's lost to Andreescu. That's like a horrible draw. Similarly, like Pliskova's lost to Sloane Stephens. You just never know which Sloane Stephens is going to turn up. Sakkari's lost to Mukova, who you picked out, didn't you, on the pod last week? Saying,
as I think, to be fair, did lots of people apparently. Yeah. I tried to sort of crow on Twitter about having picked the number 8 seed to lose in the first round. Everyone said, well, it was obvious. It was obvious in the end. Everyone's a bloody expert on Twitter. I mean, well, I'll tell you the... Sorry?
Kvitova maybe as well.
I mean, is that ever a shock? I don't know. The one I picked out, I thought was actually the big shock, is actually Annalena Kalinina. Now, she may not be fully fit, but she is a very tricky player on the clay, and obviously reached the final in Rome where she pulled out injured. I think she was reasonably fit. I didn't think she was that troubled, but Diane Parry beat her, the French wildcard who beat Krejcikova last year in the first round, who was injured in fairness. But the reason it's interesting is Diane Parry has a one-handed backhand, great, and she now plays Mira Andreeva in the second round. Mira Andreeva has just turned 16 about a month ago. She beat Alison Risk-Armitage yesterday 6-2, 6-1. I mean, she absolutely blew her away. I know Alison Risk is not, the best singles player in the world, but she is a proper player. And Andreeva, on main draw Grand Slam debut, just looked $1 million. And George, here's one that will amuse you. You will remember that she said in Madrid, where she reached the fourth round, that Andy Murray is one of her heroes. She said afterwards that she's been texting Andy Murray and messaged him when he won the Challenger and said...
Has he been replying?
Yeah, he has. She said, congrats on winning the Challenger. And he said, thanks very much and good luck at Roland Garros. And she said, maybe that's why I'm playing so well. So it's got Laura Robson, Marat Safin vibes, if you remember that sort of particular interaction.
I've just realised as well that thinking about the list of players who've been the biggest shock, I mean, I probably left out the two biggest ones there. I mean, Bencic lost to a lucky loser. I mean, that's a big surprise.
Yeah, but Bencic isn't fit, I think. She's had a hip problem. She missed Rome and Madrid, so that probably explains that.
But Krejcikova as well, I mean, that's someone we thought would potentially do well. I mean, she's not had a great clay season, which has surprised me, but I did stick by her thinking, we find. I mean, Serenko's not a bad player, but I was still disappointed by that result. It wasn't particularly close.
Yeah. You mentioned Andreescu, and it was a great match against Azarenka, finishing relatively late yesterday in 3 sets. She held her nerve I think she needed 5 match points to get over the line. She was 40-love up and blew it, but then eventually did get over the line. How significant a win is that for Bianca Andreescu, who has very limited experience on the clay?
Yeah, it's a good win. I mean, I'm reticent. I think I barred myself from ever getting excited about Andreescu getting back to her best after she then kind of rolled her ankle after her last set of good results earlier this year. She's the sort of player who should be excellent on every surface. I mean, she's got everything in her game. Like I almost don't read too much into the fact she's not been past the second round of the French Open or Wimbledon, in the sense of, as you say, she's got limited experience playing there, and a lot of that is due to a lot of injuries or not kind of being at a physical peak and confidence peak coming into those tournaments. I mean, I've seen her play well on the clay before. not seen her play so well on the grass, but she does have a game that is built for anything. She's got a great touch. She's got great feel. She's a smart player. Yeah, I don't want to say I think she can go all the way and win this or anything, but she is capable of doing great things again if she can just get her body right. I think there's no question about that. And she's someone who, in a bit of an era where we've got some thwackers in Rybakina and Sabalenka, if she were able to get back to close to what she was when she was winning the US Open, that would bring a real kind of a good contrast to that group of top players at the minute. And I think she's an interesting character as well, quite punchy in her own way, but also very kind of meditative. And I think definitely someone I kind of like team I'm actively hoping does get back to their best, because I enjoy watching them. But whether they do or not is a bigger question. I'd certainly back Andreescu to do that more than I would team at this stage.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with you there. Let's turn our minds forwards if we can, do an about turn and look into the second round. We've got half of the second round today on Wednesday, the other half on Thursday. Of course, we're into a nice rhythm now after the slight confusion that is the first 3 days of the French Open. Novak Djokovic plays his first night session today against Marton Fucsovics. Cam Norrie is the last British man standing in the singles. He takes on Lucas Pouille, which, George, I was wondering, you probably were at Norrie versus Pouille on Chatrier back in 2018, were you? Or maybe you weren't, I'm not sure. You don't look like you remember it. But it was a second round match and Pouille won in 4 sets. So doesn't feel like that's going to happen this time. But great for Lucas Pouille to be back, winning matches. Yeah,
definitely. And, I don't feel Norrie's quite in his strongest moment at the minute. I mean, couldn't really believe Benoit Paire took him to 5 sets in round 1. I mean, you do have a French tax here in terms of the crowd really getting behind them and making it interesting. But Norrie, okay, look, he got through the match, so it's not one to kind of beat him with. But Norrie is normally relatively professional at kind of seeing some of this stuff up and kind of doesn't take that sort of thing too badly. Yeah, I mean, Pouille, the guy who's very talented. He's been high in the world. He's done well in Grand Slams before, but he's another one who's had huge injury problems, had huge confidence problems, and not really one I'm expecting Cam to have huge problems with. But as I say, the caveat is Cam's not quite where he was back in February when he kind of was winning those 2 clay court, or winning 1 clay court title, reaching the final of another. Yeah, might not be the worst moment to catch him. And a French crowd, that you don't really want that back-to-back French crowd matches in your first 2
Well,
rounds.
you say that, but Cam yesterday, or it was a couple of days ago, but the quotes came out yesterday, talked about his sort of spat with Djokovic. We hadn't seen him since Rome, and so we asked him about it, and probably expecting a bit of a flat bat, and he said, well, look, I don't think I was that leery. I didn't see him. I didn't try and hit him. Oh, and by the way, he was 13 minutes late for the match and he never said a word about it and didn't say sorry. Which, needless to say, I've had a lot of people, quote, in my mentions for deigning to ask I didn't ask the question, someone else did, but apparently we shouldn't even have asked him about a tournament that happened in another country a week ago. Apparently that was wrong. So I apologise for breaking the journalism code of ethics by asking about things that have already happened. Yeah. I think he
haven't happened yet. I think.
Sorry. Yes, I think he quite likes it. I think he really enjoyed having Benoit Paire and 10,000 people against him. Like, he's obviously been through the college system where that's pretty normal to have rowdy partisan crowds, and I think there's a little bit of a shithouse developing there. Our listener, I won't name the listener, said to me the other day that is shithouse any podcast with the word shithouse in it I'm in favour of, and I think we could rename it. I think Cam Norrie is developing those qualities, and he does it quite well.
If we're renaming it, what are we saying? Tennis on shithouse or shithouse on?
We just call it the shithouse.
The shithouse.
I think that would suit. Yeah, I think he'll really relish that. Speaking of Larry matches, Stan Wawrinka, Thanasi Kokkinakis. I mean, obviously, for people who don't know the story, I linked to it in my newsletter this morning, which you can sign up for at inews.co.uk. But last year, basically, there was a confrontation between Stan Wawrinka. This is reported in the Daily Mail Australia. A confrontation between Nick Kyrgios and Stan Wawrinka in the locker room after a match in which Kyrgios had said, "I'm sorry to tell you this." Oh, that's my phone going off. That's unprofessional, isn't it? "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Kokkinakis banged your girlfriend," which Wawrinka described as something, the lowest thing you can say, which it's not quite the lowest thing you can say, but it's not far off. So Kokkinakis wasn't actually involved, but his name was involved, and now they're going to play each other. Even from a tennis perspective, this is a very interesting match, but from a non-tennis perspective, it's even more interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a decent match. I mean, that feels bloody years ago. That what year did you say that happened? I mean, that must have been
2015,
right?
I think.
Yeah, about 8 years ago. Yeah. I mean, obviously at the time that was quite a big story. I'd be kind of surprised if it was still bubbling under the surface now, but you never know.
You never know, George. You never know.
I quite in terms of other kind of shit houses kicking around in the second house, I think Corentin Moutet's always worth a little watch. He plays Andrei Rublev. He's quite a funny player as a whole, but he's also not afraid of really getting under the skin of people. So with the
and they're playing on Simon Mathieu as well, which is the weird jungle greenhouse court.
Great court.
And the top tier of Simon Mathieu is unticketed. Yeah. So if you've got a ground pass and you queue, you can get in there, and it tends to make it pretty rowdy. And as you say, Moute likes rounding people up at the best of, winding people up at the best of times. Andrei Rublev could start an argument in an empty room because he likes arguing with himself. I think Moute, if he doesn't get him to rant like 4 or 5 times in the match, he'll be disappointed in himself. And I think there's a little upset potentially on the cards there. Are there any other second round matches you wanted to kind of go ooh to, George, or is that your lot?
I wouldn't rule out Tsitsipas having a couple of problems with Carballes Baena.
Yeah,
I think that's not a straightforward match. I mean, Sonego Humbert is not a bad kind of unseeded clay court little clash. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, Fucsovics over the years has been a bit of a tough early Grand Slam draw. I can't see anything like what happened to Medvedev yesterday, but I think that's a good early test of Djokovic's condition, both physically and mentally. And Fucsovics could, if he has a good day, and those good days are maybe fewer and far further between now, but he'll be up for that, and that could be a decent one. And Taro Daniel has surprised us over the years. I find it highly unlikely he'll do the same again to Carlos Alcaraz, but he is a name who has cropped up over the years. Just he's the sort of player you don't think anything of in the nicest. I mean that in the nicest way possible, because he's obviously a very talented sportsman. But at this level, you sort of think, first round match, second round match against Taro Daniel, no problem. And actually, he has thrown that back in our faces a few times over the years. So again, not calling the upset, but careful what you wish for, I suppose, Carl.
Okay. In the women's draw, just a couple that I wanted to kind of flag. Diane Schneider against Beatrice Haddad-Meyer. Obviously, Haddad-Meyer's had a really good 12 months, but so has Schneider, and is a real up-and-comer. I don't think she's physical enough to compete on the clay at the highest level, but she's a great shot maker and a brilliant competitor. I think that'll be an interesting one. In the same section, Rybakina against Linda Noskova, who's a junior Grand Slam champion here and is one of the many rising Czechs, of which Rybakina has already put away one in Brenda Fervotova. But
those they're tomorrow, aren't they?
I think so. Yeah. I'm not today. There's not. I mean,
well, Svitolina's probably worth a little mention. I mean, that was a great result. Played really well, and nice to see both her and Monfils. I think he said that was his first win as a dad as well yesterday.
It might well be. He doesn't win many tennis matches. Yeah, that's certainly true. But yeah, Svitolina's got Storm Hunter, which, with the greatest respect, I think she'll fancy as an opportunity to make it to the third round.
probably the best match on paper today is Vondrousova Kasatkina. That could be a pretty good thing. I've got Vondrousova in my fantasy team, which means she'll almost certainly lose. and Podoroska's done well here in the past as well. That famous run to the quarters. She takes on your player Mukova. So
yeah, that's definitely got some legs to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that many of these will have already happened by the time you hear this, but hopefully it'll be a reminder to go back and watch them or keep an eye on their results. George, thank you very much for joining me before work. Very impressive time management. You're very committed indeed. Thanks very much for coming and listening. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. Find me on there as well. Find George on there. Most importantly, though, please do come back next time.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Sports Social Podcast Network.